Okay, so today's speaker is Kerry Daane Loux. She's a registered landscape architect and also the director of operations for MIG, which is a multidisciplinary planning, design, communications, technology, what else? It's an interesting firm that does a whole array of activities and really has a national, international reputation in terms of their innovative work around participatory methods and some of what Kerry will talk about today. Kerry's been practicing for a number of years in a range of settings, including public, private, nonprofit sectors, focusing mostly on site-specific planning and design, everything from community parks, schools, plazas, streetscapes, community gardens, and also looking at commercial and residential projects. She is also an alumnus of our program and teaches regularly here in the department. And she's demonstrated her excellence in service to the profession in a number of ways, one of which is as the current chair of the LDA's External Advisory Board, which helps us give us feedback in terms of the program, where we're going, how we're doing, etc. And she's also been a past president of the Northern California chapter of ASLA. So she's been doing quite a bit of different things, both professionally in the work, but also in service in her involvement with ASLA and the department. So please join me in welcoming Kerry Daane Loux.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks everyone for having me here today. I really appreciate it. I feel all wired up, so hopefully you can hear me. Oh, I do need to turn this on, don't I? There. Is that better? No. Now that should work. Okay. Yeah. So I see some familiar faces. I know I have inflated your ranks by at least one, since my husband Jeff is here. And I know he doesn't usually have time to come to these, so thanks for coming, and a number of other familiar faces. And what a great place to be. Of course, I had no classes here. We weren't here when I was in school at UC Davis in landscape architecture. And have been here a few times for advisory board meetings, but you're very, very fortunate now to have this place, this space. I'm sure many of you have worked to get this space set up, and this is the first quarter, correct? So that's great. So I'm going to be talking to you about designing in partnership with community as part of Michael's Design Activism series. And I'll give you some background information about myself and my thoughts about design activism to start. I'll talk about MIG and what we do at MIG and give you a sense of some of the projects that I've worked on as well, all related to design activism. And for my purposes, personally, I wanted to start by sort of redefining activism as being based in partnership. This is from my own professional practice. There's many, many ways of looking at activism, as you have heard from previous speakers. And in my practice, I have, throughout my career, as Michael mentioned, I've done many different things, mostly based on site-specific design, but I have tried to make a commitment to good design and designing community spaces where people gather, whether it's for a public project such as a plaza or a school, or whether it's for a private space such as a residence or a commercial property or an interior courtyard of an industrial spot. I've also made a commitment to teaching and to learning myself as well as teaching, and I have done a lot of teaching of children in schools, gardening programs, that sort of thing. I've done teaching of adults through the Master Gardener program in Yolo County. I've done teaching of students in the landscape architecture program, as well as teaching the design section of the licensing exam. So while I'm not teaching at all times professionally, I try to make that part of my practice. And I have a commitment to professional service. As Michael mentioned, throughout my career, I've done various types of work with the ASLA and with other groups. And I really encourage you all to consider that if you're not already. You probably all have passions that influence your interests and your work. And I have found that to be a very, very rewarding approach to designing, is to take some time and volunteer either for the profession or for other groups. And sometimes it can be lucrative as well. In my own private practice, I have had projects pop up because of connections that I've made through volunteer work. So that's the way I'm going to be approaching from my own personal perspective. And I'm going to be talking to you about opportunities for community partnership and activism throughout the design process. And if you start at the top, as Mark Francis talked to you about, inventing the need for design and public participation is something that we can do as professional landscape architects. We see a need, we make some efforts to go about working on it. That could be just planting in a community space, or it could be as big as starting a whole initiative or a process, as Mark talked about Central Park and East Street Plaza. Once the need is identified, the community can become involved right away, and often does. And sometimes the community is the one that invents the need and then comes to the landscape architect or designer. Early involvement by the community in ideas and programming for whatever the design may be is very, very important. I should mention that while all of these opportunities throughout the design process are great opportunities to involve the public, not every project is going to have every type of involvement. Some stellar projects may have involvement all the way through, but my own personal belief is that you don't necessarily judge a project just because it's not completely involving the public or the community all the way through, but you give it bonus points for everywhere where you can incorporate the community. The design process can involve the public and the community. Sometimes designers like to go off in their corner and work, but I think you always get a much better design when you are working with others, whether it's other designers or the community. Fundraising and volunteering is an excellent place to bring projects to fruition and to have many, many people involved. So we'll talk about that a little bit. The implementation of the project, that could be actually constructing it, or it could be doing construction documents, or it could be some other form of getting the project activated. And then once there is a project, if it's a physical project, not everything is necessarily a physical project in space, but many of the ones that we're going to be talking about are, once it's done, people are there, people are interacting in it, and every project is going to have at least that participation. So that's an important factor, is how do people use it? Do they enjoy it? Is it used the way that it was intended? Or if not, does it improve on what is intended? And finally, review and reflection. I think it's always good to go back to what we have worked on and see what works and what didn't. So these are some of the elements that I'm going to be talking about through this talk. Now, Michael pretty much covered some of my background. I thought I might just talk to you a little bit about that. I graduated from this program before it was identified as a landscape architecture program. It was environmental planning and management with 5 options, and I took the landscape architecture option. That has served me very well in my career because I have basically 2 fields, even though it's the same definition of one pot. I was able to take advantage of that. And we were accredited for the first time. The provisional accreditation the first year was the year I graduated. So I have also benefited greatly through my career from having been involved in that first accreditation process and having come back a number of times through various means, either as a visiting professional or an alumnus or as the advisory board chair to talk to accreditation teams. As Michael mentioned, I've done other types of work in my career. I was the president of Northern California chapter of the ASLA for a while. I've been trained as a UC Extension Master Gardener. That was during a time when I was raising my children and wasn't actively practicing, and that was a very enjoyable group to get involved with in Yolo County. And I'm currently and soon to be moving on from being the chair of your external advisory board. So that was started about 6 years ago, and it's been a wonderful group to work with, and I've enjoyed quite a bit many of the student interactions. I've worked in large firms, or at least at the time I worked in them, they were large. They were anywhere from 6 to 20 people. Now large firms are more like hundreds of people. So, and I do work for a large firm based in Berkeley now, MIG. We have 6 offices in California and Oregon and 1 in North Carolina. So I have worked mostly in California. And before my current, wearing my current hat as director of the Davis operations for MIG, I had a private practice in Davis and was raising our family of 3 daughters. So I'm still here, so it can be done. So we're not quite done yet, but they give me a new perspective every day. And so then we get to the present, 2008. So I've just started at MIG less than a year ago, almost a year at this point. So I'm going to be talking to you about MIG. Our family has a long association with MIG. Susan Goldsman and I served on the ASLA board together. Jeff and Daniel got their PhDs in the same year, in the same program. And Jeff actually started the Davis office of MIG, which then subsequently, very soon after, purchased Co-Design. So there's a blending of UC Davis, Co-Design, MIG, and our family experience. So hopefully it's going to be a long relationship. So talking about Moore, Isofano, and Goldsman a bit. If you have the sense that Moore, Isofano, and Goldsman or MIG is about park design, you would be right. About landscape architecture and public spaces, about designing children's play environments, a specialty of Susan Goldsman's. All of these elements are true. We do master planning for parks and public spaces. These are just some overview examples. Large-scale planning and design, streetscapes, major multi-100-acre developments. And we also have quite a specialty in public facilitation and outreach. So these are all elements that MIG does, and each of these elements has a different group within MIG that works with that. We do streetscapes and transportation planning. This is West Capitol Avenue in Sacramento, which both the Berkeley office and the Davis office worked on before I was in the firm. But it is an example of complete streets, which I think is really important, and you heard quite a bit about that from Paul Sikowski. So here are some of the services, processes, and tools that MIG offers as we go out to look for work and bring in new projects. We do visioning, we do policy and corporate strategy, and not every person in the firm does necessarily all of these things, but many of us blend with an umbrella aspect to a number of these different areas of service. Planning and environmental design, accessibility in design. We have an entire group that looks at accessibility and ADA elements and does that from a design point of view. So that's quite a specialty. We have a communications, graphics, and media group that does all of our reports and graphics. We do outreach and interactive workshops, work with communities to form coalitions. And we, again, work with children and youth quite extensively. So that's an overview of many of the elements that MIG does. And on the previous slide, which I must confess I cribbed from a previous slideshow, so I didn't actually create it. I made some adaptations to it. But at the bottom of it, creating community through community participation. So what MIG does fits in very well. That is sort of a motto, and we look at every project through that prism. So I just wanted to highlight that. So these are just some quick examples of some of these various elements I talked about. The visioning, looking at a riverfront area and considering what could happen there, and working with the community to have a vision and charting the future. Our outreach and facilitation process involves wall graphics and a signature approach. I'm sure many of you have seen or are familiar with MIG's approach, and many of the people in MIG are quite skilled at these graphics up on the wall in real time as people are making suggestions, and at the end the wall graphic is used as part of the planning process. Some people in MIG are very involved in corporate policy and working with businesses to have a good strategy as they proceed. Again, I mentioned planning and environmental design and accessibility. And I did want to mention that accessibility is not just about the disabled, but accessibility can mean access for alternative forms of and modes of transportation, such as bikes, peds. It can mean signage for making sure that a place is visible and that you can get there. And of course, here we've got the horses, so that's another form of transportation, not necessarily frequently used, but it could be an element of design. Our communications and media group often does not just reports, but taking those logos and that information out to the side of a bus or onto a hat, or creating kits for the community to be aware of what the design is. And we have an entire technology group that manages web portals and helps with technology for individual projects as well as companies. Our outreach takes many, many different forms. The interactive workshops where people dig in and get involved in the design, as well as have recorded sessions with the wall graphics, are an important element. And we help community coalitions to really chart where they want to take their projects. And many of our workshops people enjoy very much. They come away saying that it was an excellent opportunity, and they didn't think there could be solutions when they started, but the problem-solving atmosphere is very positive. So that's an overview of what MIG does, and so from an MIG perspective, I would suggest that we would redefine activism through the work of private practice of landscape architecture, which is the area that I work in, through the selection of types of projects that we do that are community-related, many related to park design. We're doing a lot of transportation work right now, as Paul talked to you about. The Complete Streets grants and community grants are the basis of many of our projects. And we also define activism through who is served. No matter what the project is, there is a concerted effort to approach the design from a multi-generational point of view, serving the entire community, including children, the disabled, and other users of the subject project. And how we complete our projects. We look at high quality, responsive design, and community-driven projects. So back to the original idea of the 8 different possible elements, phases that activism can be involved in a project. I'm just going to scroll through some MIG projects and show you some of the elements that we incorporate. So MIG has done an awful lot of work in Davis. Central Park had a number of different phases, starting with when Mark first encountered the site and talked to the city way back in the 80s, and all the way through the current, the more recent installation of the the farmers market shelter. And there are people in the office that worked with Mark and are still there that worked on some of these projects. Davis Commons, where many of you may do some of your shopping, was an MIG co-design project. Arroyo Park, which is close to where we live. So the influence of MIG in Davis is very, very strong. Mace Ranch Community Park, the Aspen Greenbelt. I have to linger on this slide for just a minute because, again, this is close to our house, and I know way back when Cheryl Sullivan worked for co-design in MIG, she came to the park and called us up and said, "Can I borrow your kids?" And so as I was going through slides, I found this picture on the right of two of our kids playing on the freeform play structure. So that was many years ago, but and I think that maybe one of them on a scooter too. I don't know for sure, but again, the connection is fun to look at. So these are some other projects, not necessarily ones that I worked on, but the historical context is very important in design. In this case, wind power was an element, and so this playground was designed with elements from the community's history. Interactive site amenities are very, very important for all ages. Sustainability is an element. Again, here we are at Central Park, and we've got the carousel, which was an element that was added later to the design and was a very, very much a community-driven piece of the park. If you haven't been down there, it's bicycle powered, and so someone sits in the seat there and turns the pedals, and in the center of the carousel are tiles that were created by community children in community workshops, and so many of the families in Davis feel that they own a piece or have contributed to a piece of the carousel. And the animals of the carousel were hand-created and painted by a specialist, one of the last artists who creates these carousel animals. On the left is a community garden, which continues to transition. Most recently, an artist in Davis, Mark Rivera, who is a fantastic ceramic artist, added another piece in the center of the garden. So projects can evolve and have community participation over time and change. And I think that's really, really important, that we think about time and change and evolving as we design. So Central Park and other projects create community just by being there, both through the design process and through having people out there using the space. MIG does a lot of custom design of site elements, as well as using commercially available products in creative ways. And here's an example at a zoo of creating a secret place. Zoo design has become a specialty of MIG and the children's environments within those zoos. We're always thinking about how to create nature or keep nature in our projects. And to get kids out there, you know, sometimes people think a tot lot is what we do to design for kids, but that's only one small piece of child development and how we work with children and people of all ages. So getting kids out there using their hands. Sand and water play is one of the key ways of getting children to be creative, to build things. And it actually, in the large picture of things, can often be the least expensive element of a playground. But if you're focused on a tot lot or a play structure, that's not where you're looking. But MIG really specializes in children's design. Here's some children gardening. This is very dear to my heart since I've done a lot of gardening with children at both the school that my kids went to and other schools through the Master Gardener program. So it's just amazing what kids learn and think about when they're out digging in the dirt. We provide for alternative modes of transit. And again, thinking about accessibility from all sorts of different points of view. Details on a design project are really, really important. There's so many examples of that, but details can be community-driven. They can be hand-created tiles, as we saw on the last slide, or in this case, whales in the landscape, which also spout water. So this is at this one is actually at Oklahoma Zoo, but there's also whales at Chase Palm Park in Sacramento. And this is up in the Sierra. This is just talking about being out, looking at the actual sites. But I find that in my design work, I'm very inspired both by nature and by being in nature, hiking, and that kind of thing. So just a couple slides here about looking at participation, that children explored a site, made models, did mind maps, all to help to determine what their ideas should be for the programming of the site. So that's a bit of an overview of some of the projects that MIG and MIG Davis has been involved with. I really focused on the ones in Davis because that's where our office is, but there are examples around the nation. And I'm coming back to this slide because I'm going to show a few projects of my own to wrap up. And then I brought some examples of MIG work and some of the work that I've done that has involved community to show at the end. So each of these projects that I'm going to show are in Davis or very close to Davis, and I'm going to go through the 8 elements that I identified. So inventing the need. This is right near our house. This was an area that had originally had some planting and design, but it was failing because the irrigation wasn't working. And the community began to really press for having a better design out there. And originally I worked with some community workshops to do some planting, and that has been now supplemented by a group called Friends of West Pond, which is now numbering over 200 people. They get email updates, they go out and do plantings, they maintain, every few weeks there's an innovation in this park site. They've added benches, they've added pathways, and it's really an inspiration what they've been able to do by focusing in and keeping people informed. But this is a completely community-generated space. The City of Davis helps with some funding, but mostly they raise their own money and get donations of plants. These iris right in the foreground were transplanted from someone's front yard. So, and many, many people walk along this bike path and enjoy this space, which also attracts hummingbirds and birds and people. This project is at Patwin Elementary School and was when I was working with some of my children's classes. One of my daughters was in a 5th, 6th grade combination, and they did 2 years in a row, they did a Jiminy Cricket Environmentality Challenge, which is a Disney-sponsored project. And they started it when they went away to outdoor education camp and came back and said, we want to do something in our community at our school. And so another parent and I worked with the teacher and the kids to come up with some ideas. And they were absolutely fantastic. They said, we want to use local materials. We want to do something beautiful and important. So they decided that they wanted to build a straw bale bench because straw is locally available. They raised money for the bench by going up into the trees and cutting out mistletoe and selling it at Christmas time so that they could raise some money. And their project that they envisioned doing in about 4 months took 3 years. So the class that initiated it, when my daughter was in 5th grade, then they continued in 6th grade, and then they came back when they were 7th and 8th graders to help finish up the project. But it's something they can be really proud of. They worked with a local artist, and every child did an art piece out of ceramics that is related to the natural environment. So you can see the project is called Meet Me at the Bench. And there's a little cricket up there that was for the Jiminy Cricket project. So this was quite a joy to work on, getting the kids. And the shape turned out to be a lot more organic than we originally envisioned because of the straw bale nature. But it's really absolutely a beautiful project. And every child that worked on it enjoyed it quite a bit, and they still enjoy it now. I also worked, this is ideas and programming. I worked on a project for the city of Davis to facilitate some neighborhood art projects. 4 quadrants of Davis were identified, north, east, south, and west. And we started with going through a process of looking at the work of 30 or 40 artists and narrowing it down to, I believe it was 10 artists, and then we interviewed them, and selected 4 and assigned them to a location in Davis. And this one in West Davis, I believe, is one of the more unusual ones. Richard Lowenberg decided that Davis was the kind of place where a flying saucer might just land. And so that's what he created out of concrete and steel, and put that little plaque there about what his project was all about. And sort of an inside story about that project was that each of the artists had great ideas, but they were supposed to wait until we had had a community workshop to talk with the public. And before we had our first workshop, Richard said, "I know what I'm going to do." And Esther Polito, who was at the city at that time, said, "Don't tell me. If it turns out to be what you wanted to do before we had the workshop, I don't want to know about it." So we still suspect that maybe this is what he had in mind, because I didn't see anything like this come out of the workshop. But it's a good structure for kids to climb on, and it certainly is unusual in the park. This is the Children's Garden next to the Patwin CDC, which started out as an empty piece of Arroyo Park. And as a parent at Patwin Elementary School, when I started hearing the principal talking about putting a parking lot in that space that was designed to be a children's garden, I said, no way. And she had good reasons, but we managed to prevail and design a community garden and children's garden in that leftover space with almost exclusively salvaged and recycled materials. So this large structure, which is about 20 by 30 feet, was used salvaged materials, and we got the donated labor from a local contractor. We were able to get some old concrete planters from the city and come in and do some art projects with the kids, some more ceramic work to decorate them, and build some benches out of some more recycled lumber. So it's really a neat park that's used by the children at the Children's Development Center next to the school, as well as at the school, and now can be rented by people in the city if they have a space that they want to use a space for picnics or something like that. Another project that I worked on that really involved a lot of fundraising and volunteering was a native plant design for a nature trail next to Northstar Park, where we put in some artist-inspired arches that had cut out letters, and there are 4 of them, and they say, "Send my roots rain," which is an early poem, the beginning of an early poem, and it was conceived at a time when, like now, we had very little water. So as you walk through the park, you see the shadow patterns on the ground. And the volunteering element of this was that we had close to 200 people out there the day we did the planting, putting in all of the native plants. And it was really quite a wonderful community event. I think it's about half a mile long, and had a lot of grasses and flowering plants installed along the edge. And this one is in our backyard. I labeled this one Participation with Implementation and Construction because although this is a residence, we prevailed upon a good friend of ours to help us build the arbor and some of the other elements in our garden. So it can work for you individually as well. So participation in the construction. And community interaction in the space. This is a project that's still in the design stage that I was working on before I came to MIG and is now on hold. But Winters would love to put a small plaza downtown that they can use for their farmers market and an art park. And they want to have art classes in there. So it needed to be a public plaza. It needed to have access for emergency vehicles that went through it, and it needed to be exciting and engaging. So early in the process, and it needed to have a covered space for the outdoor classes. So these were 3 different ideas that we talked about and then brought them together for a single idea later on. And finally, review and reflection. I worked with artists for a plaza at 5th and G Street. If you've been down there next to Ty Nacorn, there's several art pieces down there, and that plaza is being slowly revitalized with art, and it's going to have some benches and possibly a fountain. But Mark Rivera, the same artist that I spoke about earlier, did these gorgeous walls adjacent to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So the theme is agriculture and products from California. So I worked on the Davis Community Forest Management Plan for the city of Davis, looking at street trees and park trees. A current project that I'm working on right now, this is just one of them, is for the Parks Master Plan, which MIG is doing. The city has asked for some prototypes for how to bring sustainability, upgrades, and better design into some of their parks, which they will include as a prototype. So these may not necessarily get built, but there's a small pocket park on K Street that is all grass that is dying and has some play structures that are not connected. So there are some ideas that have been incorporated to enhance the play value and the aesthetic value, to reduce the turf and improve sustainability and community involvement. The other 2 parks that will have prototypes are West Manor Park in West Davis, and what I've proposed for that, which the city is very excited about, is taking the large turf panel that exists in the park, leaving some of it there for the active softball and soccer sports that use it, but using the existing drainage system by incorporating some drainage swales and keeping all the water. The goal will be to keep all of the water retained on the site instead of going into the storm drain system. Reducing some of the extensive asphalt that's on the site, and using the capture of stormwater on site to enhance the play value of the existing play structure with a natural stream and actually a dry creek, but would be used as overflow and enhancing the picnic area. So those drawings are in process right now. And finally, a project that I worked on, that this was a parking lot. The Novozymes, which is a business in Davis out on Drew Avenue, had a building that they had a U-shaped building that was built around a parking lot, and the parking lot still existed. And all of their offices and research labs looked out onto the asphalt. And I was hired to come in and turn it into something different. So we removed and salvaged the asphalt, amended the soil, added some areas that are actively used for picnicking. This picture on the bottom is a sloped lawn that people sit on. The key people in the firm have a band, and so up in the front you can't see it very well, but inside that wall in the top picture is a wood deck with a cover that is fully amplified for them to have concerts. So they fill this space up pretty regularly, and the shade structures help because the scientists walk from one side of the building to the other. So there is some sustainability involved, and I enjoyed this project a lot because it was the first time I designed a canvas and steel structure, which I've done a couple times since then. But it was a really fun project to transform that space and to see how actively they use it. So that's it. So. I just thought I would mention there are some books up here. This is a book prepared by MIG recently called Inclusive Cities, and you may want to take a look at it. It's got some good sample projects in it. And there's some other projects here. I mentioned street tree plans. The first one that I worked on was a street tree plan for the city of Oakland that was fully based on community participation. So this entire document identifies we created and identified every neighborhood about a 6-block area in Oakland, and then assigned street trees and created a process for the community to say they wanted a street tree, to fund the trees, and to go out. And this was written in the early 80s and is still in practice, and they've created a department, the Green Streets Department. And there are some other books up here as well. So, but any questions?
In the last photo you had with the canopy over the walkway, when the particular photo was taken, the shade was to the side of the walkway, and I wonder the pattern of that shade.
The walkway goes north-south, so the shade on the far side would have been early morning, and then it would fall toward the stage in late afternoon. In that project, the U faced out to a fairly unsightly area. So one of the goals was to visually enclose the patio without actually closing it off. So there's a double row of trees at the back. The raised lawn in the back helps enclose the space, as well as the 2 canopies, one over the stage, which is quite large. It's about 20 by 60 feet in 3 panels, and then the walkway that goes between. So they're not really for shade. They're for visual enclosure. Shade is also provided, and then there's somewhat for rain protection, although it's not a full cover because there's gaps in the canvas. So, yeah. Hey, Mark.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
Curious if MIG was hiring at all.
Well, I was going to mention the economic situation right now, which I'm sure all of you are feeling quite desperately. No, we're not hiring right now. We usually like to have interns. We're not really even doing that. We've kind of like circled the wagons because of the economy, but we're hoping that that will change. But I know you're interested.
Sort of the silver lining in the cloud is when we find ourselves in these times, which they're cyclical, and you'll experience a number of them in the course of your career. It's when volunteerism really goes up, and I graduated at a time when the economy was not doing too well, and I started volunteering on projects, and those were my first sort of internship experiences, and I guess partly my enthusiasm, excitement on projects then led to getting hired to work on those projects as time progressed. So, I guess, we can look at this time as a time of opportunity as much as it is a difficult time for many, many people.
We'll look back on it as a time of opportunity. We may not look at it that way right now, but
the questions, Kerry. I've got a question.
Yeah.
Participation has been an important part of your work, and now as part of MIG as well. You've worked in different sectors for a period of time to see how participation has evolved. What are some of your observations about participation when you started practice to now? Is it changed? Is it more or less the same thing? Is it new issues come up?
Well, I think that community participation is a very popular topic now, so many firms are doing it and using some of the processes that are out there. I think I've been fortunate to work for two firms that have really used a lot of public participation. I worked with Byron McCulley at Amphion early in my career, and I've worked with MIG. Those two processes, I think people within the firms might say that they were dramatically different, but from stepping back a bit, I think that they were very similar in that you create ways of getting the community to be involved, whether it's on paper, them doing the work themselves, or up with facilitation graphics. I think a key is really intending to use the community participation and to be open to hearing about it, which sometimes is not the role of the designer. It could be the role of the client or whatever is funding the project, but one of the biggest transitions that I've seen is groups like Caltrans insisting on public outreach for all of their projects. So I really think that it's become incorporated into the expectations, along with many other very positive elements, such as the sustainability and a number of other elements. But I think that is a sign that it's no longer just the boutique firm that might say, oh, well, we've got this special thing that we do, but it's part of the overall process of design.
Right.
Yes. No, we're still not hiring, Mark.
When you're doing when designing for children specifically,
Yes.
what kind of techniques do you use to get children involved in that kind of design process?
Well, you want to gear the elements to the children. So starting out, how do you get the children there to be part of the design process? Once you get them there, then having the right methods for them to feel successful and positive about how they participate. Usually hands-on work is really, really important. You don't want them to be sitting there raising their hands. But I really think that the key is to get them there and to figure out ways to engage them. And of course, it's very different for different age groups. And that's one of the things that has developed in children's play is the identification of what age group you're targeting. And there's actually state standards for providing play for different age groups, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, and 5 to 8, and teens. So their needs are different.
Great. All right, let's thank Kerry again for...
Thank you very much.